Welcome back, everybody. We're on chapter 9 called Law of Forgiveness. Now, again, we are working out of the book Working with the Law by Raymond Holliwell. I mean, this is one of the best books I've found, one of my favorite books I've had for like 10 years, 12 years, read this book over and over and over again. Really about the laws of the universe and how to really make the laws of the universe work for you. Because remember, every single law of the universe, it has its opposite. And what I mean by that, it runs on a straight line. You know, if there's a cold, well, what's the opposite of cold? There has to be a hot. Okay, so there's a cold, there has to be a hot. You know, if there's a positive, well, the opposite of positive, there has to be a negative. So each law works like that. So each law works on its own plane, and it's in its own sphere. So when you violate the law, when you violate the laws of the universe, when you live against the laws, all it meaning is that besides thinking positive, well, you're thinking negative. That's pretty much what it is. It's on the same line. So other than that, let's get rocking and rolling. Don't want to talk too much. These videos have been a little bit lengthy, but it's the knowledge. Because with old school prosperity teachers, when they wrote books, they didn't write books for fluff. Like nowadays, when you buy books, even a new prosperity teacher, their whole book, they fill it with a lot of fluff because they're trying to sell you on another course, sell you on something else. And there's nothing wrong with that. But when old school prosperity teachers, when people wrote books way back in the day, this book is written it was published in 1967. So, it's just filled with wisdom. There's no fluff whatsoever. He's not trying to sell you on anything else, but just give you just solid information. So other than that, let's talk about chapter 9, Law of Forgiveness. And it's really getting to the meat and potatoes of this book because each chapter, it's growing and it's connecting to the previous chapter. So it's getting more higher consciousness. But these later chapters, they just speak overall volumes to me, especially when we talk about forgiveness. What's so important about forgiveness? How do we violate this law of forgiveness? What's the complications? What comes with it when you violate this law? So forgiveness, this is one of my other favorite chapters. Almost every book in this, every chapter in the book is my favorite chapter. But each chapter in its unique way just speaks volumes to me. When I start reading it and the examples he gives, I sit back and think, dude, I'm doing that. Or I've done that in the past. Or I have a habit of doing this. And maybe I don't do it every day. Maybe I don't do it every week. But, but it keeps on reoccurring in my life. So that's what I mean. So let's dive into this and see what Raymond Holliwell has to say about the law of forgiveness. And of course, in every chapter, he uses a verse out of the Bible. And the verse is, "Forgive, and you shall be forgiven." Luke chapter 6, verse 37. And remember, with old school prosperity teachers, every old school prosperity teachers took out of the New Testament what Jesus taught. But Jesus really taught abundance. Jesus really taught abundance is your birthright. Heaven is within you. You have the same power that Jesus has. Okay, and he even stated this in the New Testament, that everything he could do, all the miracles he performed, you can do as well, and you can do even more. So they really taught on the abundance and the prosperity side of Jesus. And this is, so don't let these verses, if you're just jumping into this, don't let these verses scare you, because he's really dissecting these verses, what they truly mean. So forgive, and you shall be forgiven. Luke chapter 6, verse 37. We're going to dive into this verse here, dive into the law of forgiveness. There are crucial things in life that call for great human qualities. Our present fear is that man will not be big enough to meet the demands of the day. A lack of large character or equipment is a real peril at all times. It is here and now that the world needs the help of a master such as Jesus Christ. Jesus taught bigness of character to his followers. With his bigness within himself, he was more than a preacher. He was a teacher supreme. He not only pointed the way, but he went forward and showed the way. In the hours of great stress, he showed himself mightier than Pilate, the governor of Judea, or Cephas, the high priest, the head of the church, or any and all of the accusing scribes and Pharisees. It is true that for a moment that they had power over his body and tried him, and they tried him and condemned him to be crucified. Now remember, back in the old times when Jesus was alive, they crucified murderers. It was pretty much murderers, people who murder people, rape people. So when they put someone to death, they crucified them. Okay, they beat them and hung them on the cross until they died. That was the same thing Jesus was going through, even though he didn't murder not even one person. He was doing miracles, teaching people, but yet they wanted to crucify him. Listen to this. They wanted to crucify him like he was a murderer. He was a rapist. That's what they wanted to do. That's why during that time, and this is huge. This is just huge to have a man crucified. So they crucified him. The maximum sentence that could be given to anyone. So he got the maximum sentence given to anybody at that time. But through it, all his mind and spirit commanded them. They dragged him through the streets, bound him as a prisoner. They nailed him to the cross on the hill of Calvary. But he, looking down upon them and seeing their smallness of mind, cried out, "Father, forgive them, for they not know what they do." So we all know probably this famous verse here. As he's hanging on the cross, as he's in the moments of death, after they just really beat him, and even in the New Testament, when they beat him, the best movie that really showed the kind of how it was really done during that time through all the research was Mel Gibson's movie called The Passion of the Christ. That was brutal because he really did a lot of research of what type of weapons they used, what they really used when they whipped you and beat you. It wasn't just a normal little whip and you got some lashes on your back. Even in the New Testament, it said that they beat him until he was unrecognizable. You couldn't recognize him. That's how bad they beat him. And that was before he walked through the streets of Calvary when people carrying the cross and people beat him even more before they even hung him on the cross. So that's, he really got just a brutal, brutal punishment. Way over any other criminal at that time. And even though they did all this to him, moments before his death, he's hanging on a cross. And he's hanging on a cross with a couple other people. And he cried out. He said, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." So even moments before his death, when all these people pretty much beat him to death, it's still in that place of higher consciousness, higher prosperity, and he knew the law of forgiveness. And he cried out to his Father, cried out to God, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." A man who is great enough to forgive is always greater than the forgiven. Listen to this. Now bring this up. A man who is great enough to forgive is always greater than the forgiven. So now we're really going into the power of forgiveness. Why did Jesus really teach the power to forgive? A man who is great enough to forgive is always greater than the person you're forgiving. He is superior. He is greater than his adversary. Peter, the disciple, was greatly perplexed one time while listening to one of the many lessons of the Master. He raised a question which is the basis of this lesson. Turning to Jesus, he asked, this is what he asked Jesus right here. He asked, "Lord, how often shall my brother sin against me? And I forgive him until 7 times. Now, this was a generous gesture on his part, because now you have to remember, for the Jewish law, which he had known, allowed a man to be forgiven 3 times. This was more than twice the grace that the law allowed. So Peter must have felt the Lord would be pleased with his extension of forgiveness. But he found himself even more perplexed when Jesus answered. This is what Jesus answered. This is what Jesus told him. "I say not unto thee until 7 times, but until 70 times 7. Now, this is like a tongue twister here. What does this really mean? So here's Peter. He's asking Jesus, now, how often should we forgive somebody? Then not Jesus, but Peter even said, how often shall my brother sin against me? And I forgive him until 7 times. So Peter kind of going at Jesus, because Jewish law at that time is you forgive somebody 3 times and that's it. So Peter saying, well, I can forgive him 7 times. And he thought Jesus would be pleased with that. He thought he would impress Jesus. Then Jesus said, I say unto thee, until 7 times, but until 70 times 7. So what does this mean? Such a period would be indefinite. So Jesus is saying, you forgive someone indefinitely. And this kind of floored Peter at this time, because Jewish law was, you don't just keep on forgiving. You forgive someone 3 times. After 3 times, you don't forgive them no more. That was Jewish law at that time. So by that answer, there are no limits or restrictions to the spirit of graces. The quality of forgiveness must be as limitless as faith, hope, and love. Listen to this. The quality of forgiveness must be as limitless as faith, hope, and love. Now, one of the things I want to point out here is when we go through this chapter, he's going to talk a lot about sin, okay? And since it's on my mind, I'm going to highlight sin here. Now, all sin means, remember, when we're going through all these chapters, sin means a separation from God, okay? Meaning you're not living to his laws, you're not living to his commandments. Okay, so if sin means you're separated from God, what does God mean? Okay, God means, another name for God in Hebrew is law. Okay, you're violating the laws of God. You're separating yourself from the laws of the universe. So when you're sinning against God, you're sinning against law. What that means is, when we're going through all these laws, of the universe, what it means is you're not living in harmony with the law. So if you're not living in harmony with the law, I mean, for example, a simple example would be, is if there's a positive, there has to be a negative, okay? That's kind of the law of positive thinking. Okay, you think positive. If you don't think positive, the opposite would be negative. If I'm not living in harmony with this law, what that means is I'm constantly thinking negative. My mind is constantly dwelling on the negative. So I'm sinning against the law. I'm not living in harmony with the law. So that's all sin means. The teachings of Jesus is in reference to man's power to forgive sins are, I believe, among the least understood of all the commands. Okay, and he even points out, with all the pastors, with all the churches, even in his time and even today in 2024, is the teaching of Jesus in reference to man's power to forgive sins are, I believe, among the least understood of all the commandments, of everything that Jesus has taught. This is the least understood, the power to forgive. As a rule, there was a separation made between sin and many effects. Now here, he's going to start explaining kind of how I put it, but just in different ways. As a rule, there is a separation made between sin and many effects. When a man sins, we have been taught to think that this was a job for the minister. And so he is called to pray for the sinner. When a man becomes sick and distressed in the mind and body from the effects of the sin he committed, we call for a doctor. The doctor in turn endeavors to treat or repair the body and arrest the suffering. This, at best, we know is but a temporary measure, for no real healing or permanent cure can be effected until the doctor and the minister work together. Jesus was a master physician in that he dealt with sin and sickness jointly. Listen to this. Jesus was a master physician. So because he dealt with sin, the separation from God, the separation from law. Okay, you're not living in harmony with the law. So he dealt with sin and sickness jointly. So if you were sick in the body, he dealt with it jointly. Okay, he combined the two. There is no separation. Everything is congruent. Okay, all of our body systems, our blood system, circulatory system, our lymphatic system, cardiovascular system, all of our body systems are run congruently. They're all intertwined. You can't just take one away and you think you're going to live. All our body systems go congruently. So this is the same thing he's saying here. Sin and sickness are jointly. When they brought a man to him who had been sick with palsy, Jesus spoke of forgiving the man's sins in order to heal him. Listen to this. Jesus spoke of forgiving the man's sins in order to heal him. The people who had gathered around and heard him speak questioned his actions. They said, "Who is this that speaks blasphemies?" Okay, the reason why who is this who speaks blasphemies is because they at that time they thought Jesus was a devil, because he's living, basically what he's doing, he's teaching against the Jewish law. He's teaching against what all the big religious leaders at that time was teaching. And during that time also, you have to understand that when Jesus was alive and he was teaching, the king oppressed its people, and the strong religious leaders at that time oppressed its people. So it was oppression in both ways. That's why the big message of Jesus was abundant. When Jesus said, "Go spread the good news," even if I'm not here on this earth, go spread the good news. The good news is the truth. But the truth is, abundance is for everybody. The truth is that Jesus is inside you. You have the same power as Jesus has. You can perform all the miracles he did. Okay, that's the truth, because heaven is within you. Abundance is your birthright. So that's really the truth. Okay, and you see this through all the miracles that Jesus performed. Who can forgive sins but God alone? Okay, this is what they're questioning. That's why they think he's a blasphemer. A blasphemer, if I can say that word. He can forgive sins but God alone. Who can forgive sins but God alone? They did not understand how he could consider sin as a cause of palsy. So they were looking at it as a separate entity, like we do today. Everything's separate, everything's compartmentalized. But there are some no further advanced today who still want to believe that such a disease is caused by a physical or an organic disorder, rather than to accept the possibility of being a mental or a spiritual laxity. I'll say this again. But there are some no further advanced today, and that's what he's saying. Like from the Bible times, you're going back centuries. Okay, from the Bible times, then when he published his book in 1967. So now he's saying, 1967. There are some that were no further advanced today than they were back in Jesus' time. And even when I'm reading this to you in 2024, it's really the same concept. Okay, is everything separate? That's just what we're taught in school. Everything is separate. Everything is compartmentalized. We're not taught that everything is congruently working together. Okay, so it's the same thing even today than it was in Holliwell's time as it was in Jesus' time. So that's what Holliwell is saying. But there are some no further advanced today who still want to believe that such a disease is caused by a physical or organic disorder, rather than to accept the possibility of it being a mental or a spiritual laxity. Jesus plainly taught that if you forgive sin, the effect of such an act of forgiveness would become absorbed with natural and healing ideas, much the same as the blackest of the night is absorbed with the dawn of light. The blackness disappears and the light of day shines upon all alike. When healthy and natural ideas fill the mind the body takes on a like condition. Okay, so this is what he's saying. When you have a healthy mind, you have a healthy body. Okay, so this is where I'm at right here. That's why it's connected. Okay, this is so powerful. Everything is connected. Everything runs congruently. Our mind is not separate from the body. So this is what Jesus is saying. That's why Jesus forgave. He forgave sin in order to heal somebody, because he knew you were pretty much sick in the mind with all this negative thinking, negative chatter. Okay, so if he healed the mind, the body would act in congruent with the mind. So that's basically what's being said here. When healthy, natural ideas fill the mind, the body takes on a like condition. Thus, our progress, men and women who are turning to a broader field of study and are effecting healings through mental and spiritual processes, are not giving anything new. They are merely catching up with the facts of all the saints, sages, avatars, and the masters, as well as the brightest scientists of the day. This is why forgiveness is so powerful, because you're linking the mind and the body. It's interweaved, it's interconnected. Jesus taught that the originary place of every act was in the mind. He said in brief that where there is lust in the heart, there is sin. Now remember, sin is a separation from God. Okay. Now another name from God in Hebrew is law. So sin is a separation from law. What do we mean by law? Laws of the universe, laws of God. So if sin separates you from the law, you're not living in harmony with the law. Okay. Though the act may never be committed. At another place, he speaks of the origin of sin being in the mind first before the act is ever committed. Listen to this. At another place, he speaks of the origin of sin being in the mind first. Everything starts in the mind first before the act is committed. So the mind and body is interweaved, it's interconnected. Then he says, for from within, he said, out of the heart of man proceed evil thoughts, adulterers, murderers, thieves, deceit, blasphemy, pride, foolishness. All these evil things come from within, and they defile the man. So everything starts from within before it starts an outside appearance. It's the same thing with manifesting. That's why it's an inside out. It's not from the outside in. Now this is an example he gives. He does give a lot of examples in this chapter to kind of really hammer in his point, Holliwell's point. Scientists accept the truth that the body of man is moved by the mind. Okay, so like scientists, they accept the truth that the body of man is moved by the mind, that all its functioning is governed by a ruling thought, whether that thought is subjective or objective. Now, he's bringing up that he might explain this, but subjective thought is your subconscious mind, and your objective thought is your conscious mind, your waking mind, your analytical mind. So that's all he means. Whether it is conscious or unconscious. Those who study the mental processes find that all the conditions of the body are created and caused by the mind. Listen to this. Those who study the mental processes, those who study manifesting, those who study the mind, those who study how the mind works and being overall positive, how that's going to affect the body. So that's what he's talking about. Those who study the mental processes find that all the conditions of the body are created and caused by the mind. It is known that the creation in any and every form is governed by and subject to law. Hence, when one misuses, inverts, or violates a law, this mistake is called a sin. So now he's kind of explaining sin as I'm explaining it, to you. Kind of explaining it in a more simple way. Hence, when someone misuses, inverts, or violates a law, the laws of the universe, the laws of God, this mistake is called a sin. So we're not living in harmony with the laws of the universe. A sin is a mistake, a misunderstanding, and a misjudgment. A mistake is falling short of or disobeying the law, whether the law be mechanical or spiritual. Correction is the only method of adjustment or as appeasing the law. Thus, repentance and forgiveness are the only means available to alter and correct the mistake. So here he's giving, how do you correct this mistake? How do you correct, misusing the law, misusing the laws of the universe, but not living in the harmony with the laws of the universe? Is he says right here, thus repentance and forgiveness are the only means available to alter and correct the mistake. They are the only means of liberating man from suffering the painful consequences of a mistake. They are the only means that will enable him to become in accord or in harmony with the law. So I keep on saying harmony with the law. We're not living in harmony with it. Forgiveness of sin means that we must forgive, forsake, and forget that thought of a person or condition which prompted the sin. It means to abandon or let go of the thing that you ought not do. To abandon or release the wrong thoughts or idea is to be absorbed and liberated from its sinful effect. Forgiveness is the first requirement that permits man to be in harmony with the law of his being. So I love this whole paragraph I just read there. Okay, and this really reminded me of Neville Goddard. Neville Goddard has a whole lecture on forgiveness, and no, one of the things with Neville Goddard is, he's old school, he's very sophisticated. A lot of his stuff, when you listen to him, you gotta re-listen to, especially if you're listening to his live lectures. And it's you really have to pay attention. If your mind just drifts off, you come back and you think, what is this guy talking about? But I love the way Neville Goddard has put it too, is when you talk about forgiveness, and he's not talking about forgiveness of sin. He's talking about overall forgiveness. He's talking about, for example, if you forgive somebody, forgiveness means forgetfulness. So he says true forgiveness, to truly forgive somebody or truly forgive something, is to forget about it. You completely forget about it. It's gone. It left your mind. That's true forgiveness. True forgiveness is forgetfulness. And Holliwell brings this up, in this short little paragraph. So I'll read it one more time to you. True forgiveness is forgetfulness. Lots of times we think we can fool God, we can fool the universe, fool universal laws, and we say we forgive somebody, but then we go in our private life and our private thoughts, and we still sit there and think, we still complain. Or 5 years later, we're still talking about that person who wronged us. But yet, at the same time, we say we forgive them, but we keep on bringing that situation up. So we didn't truly forgive them because we can't forget about it. Okay, true forgiveness is forgetfulness. What's forgetfulness? You abandon all the thoughts. It's like it never happened. It doesn't even enter your mind. Okay, so forgiveness is sin that we must forgive, forsake, and forget that thought or person or condition which prompted the sin. It means to abandon or let go of the thing you ought not do. To abandon or release the wrong ideas or idea is to be absorbed and liberated from its sinful effects. Forgiveness is the first requirement which permits man to be in harmony with the law of his being. Who can tell what law is? Who can tell what that law is? We may ask. Anyone who studies man as both a mental and physical being can know the law. If he were to try to learn the law by studying the physical actions or the results of sin alone, it would lead to nowhere. He would be running around in circles, and that would be useless and futile. If he were to go deeper and study the causes at that which prompted the sin, he would get results. So basically he's saying, when we study anything, it's going to the root cause. It's not, you're not just looking at physical, you're not just looking at physical in your outside world. You're going to the root. He must analyze the case and search for some harbored, hidden, and forgotten shock or condition that would cause the illness. Okay, listen to this. And something just popped in my mind when I read this. He must analyze the case and search for some harbored, hidden thoughts, our secret life that we live, our secret thoughts, and forgotten shock or condition that would cause such illness. Now, when I read this is probably one of the main reasons, right, manifesting don't work. It's because, remember, we're manifesting who we truly are. We're manifesting our secret you. Okay, your secret thoughts, the secret thoughts you don't tell nobody. Okay, that's what's really coming into your life. That's really what you're manifesting. That's why you're having a hard time manifesting what you really want, because you have to change from within. So it's kind of basically from within out. That's what's coming into your life. That's why we're having trouble manifesting. Then, unless this harbored thought is uprooted from the unconscious mind or memory, this condition will continue to appear again and again in spite of all the surface remedies that may be applied to arrest the pain. Like weeds in a garden. I come up here a little bit, kind of like this. Like weeds in a garden. If you go about and cut them off each time they appear before your eyes, they may be cut off for a time, but because they were not pulled out root and all, they will sprout again. Weeds must be pulled out completely to be destroyed and permanently removed. So he's really talking about, you go to the root of the problem. Okay, you don't just go to the surface. The surface is basically what's happening in your 3D world. Okay, really, if you're talking about manifesting your surface results is what's going on in your 3D world. What's going on in your present moment. What's going on in your world right now. Like what type of things are coming into your life? Okay, that's your surface thoughts. But Holliwell knew you have to go to the root. The root is your mind, what you're thinking about all day long. The secret, your secret thoughts. You have to go to that root, and then once you go to that root, you can fix it within. So that's why it's within out. But you have to go to the root. What's the root cause of why all these things are coming into your life that you don't want? A noted physician talking before a group of other medical men on this very subject of thought being the source of a disease was recorded as having said in his concluding remarks, abnormal tumors and cancers are due to a long period of suppressed grief and anxiety. Listen to this. Abnormal tumors and cancers are due to a long period of suppressed grief and anxiety. Another way of saying that such diseases are due to a lot of sinful thoughts getting bottled up and suppressed within our minds. Okay, this is like when he's saying this right here, basically all of our negative thoughts, psychologists agree that we have about, I don't know how they know this, but anyway, it's research, but we have about 65 to 70,000 thoughts every single day that our mind is constantly going. About 70% of those thoughts are negative and redundant. So when we get in the negative cycle, we're basically just on the cycle of negativity. We're just basically repeating the same thing to ourselves over and over and over and over and over and over and over again, but it's negative, and that's what he's saying. Another way of saying that such diseases are due to a lot of sinful thoughts or negative thoughts that get bottled up and suppressed within our minds. It's bottled up and suppressed within us, because we're just constantly festering on all this negativity. And it has no way to release, so it's bottled up in us. If this state is so destroying, it might be wise for us to probe into our own selves and note the effect our emotions have upon the physical orgasm. Then let us seek as every means at our command to overcome, abandon, and forsake every emotional tug that has a deliberating and disturbing effect. Another leading psychologist said, most of the cases of mental disorder of a functional type are due to a sense of guilt. Okay, listen to this. Most of the cases of a mental disorder of a functional type are due to a sense of guilt. Okay, have you ever felt guilty? Sometimes it's simple things. Sometimes it could be like you go out for a dinner, you pay for it, you come home, you feel guilty. Or maybe you're trying to eat healthy and you go out and you eat a huge fattening meal and you come back and you feel guilty. Those are simple forms of guilt. Now there's bigger forms of guilt, of course. Maybe you took advantage of somebody and you feel guilty for it. You know what I mean? There are some harbored and congested thoughts that need forgiveness. Usually a sick mind fears to release them or to forgive them. Listen to this. Right down here. Usually a sick mind fears to release them or to forgive them. Okay, when you're all caught up in this negativity, the last thing you want to do is to release those negative thoughts or forgive those negative thoughts or to forgive that person who wronged you. That's the last thing you really want to do. This is so natural, for they were able to release and forgive their fearful thoughts, and they would no longer be sick-minded. Professor Gates of the Psychological Laboratory of Washington, D.C., in an experiment testing the emotions and reactions of the body, found some interesting results. He found some 40 bad emotions and many more that were good. Of all the bad emotions, he said the reaction of guilt was the worst. Of all his studies, he found that the reaction of guilt was the worst. The reaction of you feeling guilty for doing something, no matter how small, how large, was the worst. This deduction was gained by chemical analysis of perspiration taken from the body. A small quantity of the perspiration was taken from each emotional reaction and tested. The bad emotions showed a strong acid test. Now, if you put some acid on your flesh, you would know that you would know what would happen. So if you drop like a drop of acid on your skin, you know it's going to burn you and it's going to eat into your skin. So we all know what's going to happen if we did that. Okay, the acid will burn, and if allowed to continue to burn, it will prove painful and destroy the very tissue of your flesh. It is just It is just such a chemical reaction that is affecting the tissue and organism of the body. When these destroying thoughts are allowed to harbor within and generate a poison which weakens and eventually destroys the body. So he basically found that there was more in your sweating. That's what perspiration is. You're sweating. When you felt guilty, it caused a little bit more perspiration. But within your perspiration, within your sweat, you had a higher acid. You had a higher acid amount within your sweat. So that's what he's saying. That's why the body really gets sick when we don't live in harmony, or you constantly feel guilty, or you constantly harbor negative emotions, negative thoughts. A wise physician one day had a caller who, as he put it, had gone the round of doctors and sanitariums, but with it all was yet not healed. In fact, he was growing worse, and in addition to original malady, he had an increase in condition of I don't know how to pronounce that, like melancholia with a suicidal tendency. The physician, knowingly that he had gone the rounds and had medical care, decided to approach the case from a mental angle. So, okay, here's this patient. He's basically went from physician to physician to doctor, probably from hospital to hospital, and he's still sick with this condition right here, melancholia with a suicidal tendency. So he goes to this new physician, and this physician, knowingly that he basically did his due diligence to go to every single doctor, and he still wasn't healed. He still couldn't get it. He still couldn't heal him. So the physician, knowing that he had gone the rounds and had medical care, decided to approach the case from a mental angle. He questioned and studied each answer with care. After a time, he gained the confidence of his patient and learned the real secret cause of his long illness. Remember, he's trying to get to the root. The doctor's trying to really get to the root. And really, old school doctors, you'll find more and more, they really wanted to get to the root cause of the issue. Many years before, this man, so this is what he found out, going to the root cause. He kind of befriended the man, asking questions. They developed, a relationship. So the man felt free to kind of, tell him a deeper thing, so he can really understand what's going on. So he says, many years before, this man and his brother were business partners, and the man was appropriated and lost some money that rightfully belonged to his brother. It was used in such a way that his brother could not have found this out if he had investigated. They later severed business connections, and he retired from that work. But, as he put it, he could never forgive himself for taking the money. So, him and his brother was business partners. They probably had a business. He doesn't really say what he did with the money, but he looked like he was probably stealing money from the business, so stealing money from his brother. And so, I don't know what he was doing with it, but we can all guess. But we just don't know at this point. But basically, the business fell apart. That the relationship between him and his brother was severed, was kind of cut. So they probably don't talk. They probably hate each other. So he could never forgive himself. He could never forgive himself for taking the money. He wanted to return it, but he could not do so without the brother learning the truth. He said it was not the fear of legal punishment that tormented him so much, but the possible loss of his brother's affection. They had always been inseparable and devoted. It was for this reason that he feared to confess his guilt and make amends in whatever way he could. The physician explained that the thing to do was to relieve this pressure. So this is what the physician told him. The physician explained the thing to do was to relieve this hidden pressure, to relieve this hidden guilt. This guilt was just tearing him up. The only way to do it was to call on his brother and make a clean breast of a whole affair. Basically, call his brother and just come clean what he did. Tell his brother what he did. The patient, not equal to suggestion, went home to think it over. 3 days later, he called the physician, stating that he had spent 3 dreadful days and sleepless nights battling with himself, and he had decided to visit his brother. He was in such a mental state that he knew his brother's treatment, once he learned he was a thief, could be no worse than the misery he was suffering. He told his brother the story, and to his surprise, listen to this. This is where we are right here. So he finally went to his brother and basically confessed what he did to his brother. Confessed what he did to the business. Confessed what he did taking the money. So he told his brother the story, and to his surprise, the brother threw his arms about him and rejoiced with him that was cleared from his mind. So the opposite happened. He dreaded telling his brother, and the whole guilt was pretty much eating him alive. You know what I mean? Because he had the whole thing of, I can't tell my brother's going to have nothing to do with me. You know, pretty much. But the opposite happened. When he actually told his brother, the opposite actually happened. So that's why he said, to his surprise, the brother threw his arms about him and rejoiced with him that this was cleared from his mind. It was a joyful time for them, for that cloud, the only cloud in their lives, had disappeared. The skies were clear again, and the restoration of the health of the patient was miraculously to those who did not understand what he had been cleared away. So basically, his whole ailment, his whole disease just went away, disappeared, because the whole point of this disgusting guilt inside his body was making him sick. Basically his whole thoughts and guilt was making him sick. So until that pressure was released, that was the only thing was his healing power, is going to his brother and just confessing. Through repentance and forgiveness, the man was able to do as Jesus had commanded the woman that he was called upon to judge. Listen to this. Through repentance and forgiveness, the man was able to do what Jesus had commanded the woman he was called upon to judge. Go thy way and sin no more. The rooted sorrow had been plucked from his memory. His mind was free to think on happy and joyful thoughts. Listen, because basically when we're guilty, especially with a man, especially in this example, is, he felt just so horribly guilty. So he's just festering on these thoughts all day long. Those are just thoughts that basically just repetitive thoughts, just constantly. Once you wake up in the morning, that's what he was thinking about. So now, since this was basically abandoned from his memory, now when he just went to his brother and confessed everything, it was just out of sight, out of mind. At this point, it just, boom, disappeared. So his mind was free to think on healthy, happy, and joyful thoughts. This allowed his body to be quickly healed. And to some, it may have seemed like a miracle, but not at all. So he's saying it's not a miracle. It was a natural law operating in a natural, unrestricted way. So he's basically a law of forgiveness. He's basically living in sin because he's not forgiving. Remember, sin is just a separation. Sin is just, you're living in harmony with the law. You're not living in harmony with the law. That's all it is. Facing such I can't talk today. I'm so sorry. I'm like stumbling over all my words. Facing such indisputable facts, we can understand more fully why Jesus so often spoke of forgiving sin. We knew the law of forgiveness, and he knew how vitally important a part it played in every man's life. So this is what he's saying when Jesus taught about forgiveness. Okay, so he's saying we can understand more fully why Jesus often spoke about forgiving sin. Okay, now we can understand why that forgiveness was such a huge teaching element in Jesus. Because Jesus knew the law of forgiveness, and he knew how vitally important a part it played in every person's life. The more we study it, the more amazed we become at its simplicity and accuracy of fulfillment. We are to forsake, for as Solomon tells us, a sin forsaken is a sin forgiven. So right here, a sin forsaken is a sin forgiven. To forgive, to release some part of our disposition that is not an asset nor pleasure to others around us. In turn, we are repairing the breach where we have missed the mark, made a mistake, or sinned. Weeds do not remove themselves in time. Instead, they will increase and grow stronger until they choke out the flower. The same thing is true of our sinful thoughts. So sinful thoughts are negative thoughts. Okay, no matter what they are, they're just negative thoughts. Remember, the even the law of thinking. Okay, when we study that law, now he's talking about the law of thinking. No sinful thoughts. Okay, what's the opposite of positive? Well, negative thoughts. So that's all it is. We're not living in harmony with the law of thinking. In the garden of our memory, they must be plucked out, cast out, and destroyed so that our flowers of healthy and happy thoughts may grow. A man may have the habit of excessive drinking, and is not only miserable within himself, but causes much unhappiness in his home. He desires to overcome this sinful habit. He is given every aid from his friends and loved ones to help him resist the desire and the craving for drink. Time after time, he rises above the temptation, and then he fails. Repeatedly, his family forgives him and encourages him to battle on. Finally, he reaches the place where he no longer has the craving. Then he is able to forsake the desire for drink and overcome its sinful effects. Then he has forsaken not the drink alone, but the desire for drink. When man forsakes the idea that prompts the desire and brings about the physical action, then and not until then does the law forgive and lift him from its deliberating effect. A sin forsaken is a sin forgiven when the thought or idea that prompted the sin is corrected. James explains the truth clearly in saying, every man is tempted when he is drawn away from his own lust and enticed. Then when lust has conceived, it brings forth sin, which is error. Or sin is living not in harmony with the law. Simply put, it means that every man, when he conceives an idea that is wrong, destructive, or evil and dwells upon it, eventually causes it to become a fact. This is law of attraction right here. But this is law of attraction, law of manifesting, but an opposite, because again, we're not living in harmony with the law. And he's talking about the law of thinking here. Like attracts like. Okay, we think positive, positive will be brought to you. Think negative, negative will be brought to you. So when we talked about even the law of compensation is always focused on the good all around us. Always pull out the good in every situation. No matter if it's a negative situation, pull out the good. Okay, we're complaining about somebody. Stop doing that. Pull out the good. Pull out what you like about them. So he says, simply put, it means that every man, when he conceives an idea that is wrong, destructive, or evil, and dwells upon it means when you really dwell upon something, you're living that life. All you're thinking about is just negative thoughts. That's what dwells upon mean. Eventually causes it to become a fact. Okay, so once you dwell upon the negative, it's eventually going to manifest more of that into your reality. That's what he's saying. When he wishes to overcome a sinful condition, he does not waste time wrestling with the fact, but corrects, forsakes, forgets, and forgives the idea that started it. This is the weed in the garden that must be pulled out. Top, stock, root, and all to be completely discarded. So you're pulling out everything of that weed. You're pulling out the root, okay? Because if you pull out the root, it's not going to come back. You got to the root cause of the issue, the root cause of your bad thinking. At another time, we find Jesus repeated the law and with some explanation. In his prayer, he states, "Forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors." This is a perfectly reasonable proposition. As we forgive those who transgress against us, so shall we be forgiven of our transgressions. This law has followed us down through time, and today we speak as though it were something new. We call it modern psychology. Okay. Stumbling over my words a little bit, but what he's saying is, when Jesus gave another, verse, or he explained the law in different ways. He explained the law of forgiveness in different ways throughout the New Testament. So the same thing we've heard, like, forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. So this law has allowed us down through time. So we've all heard of it down through time, and it was said in one way or another, or very similar. And today we speak as though it were something new. We call it modern psychology. Okay, so I kind of like when he said this, because it really is true. Like, even today in 2024, everything is really regurgitated. It's the same information from decades and decades ago, but it's just basically the terminology change. We call it something different. We explain it a little bit different, but it's the same thing that was taught decades and decades ago. Nothing really changed. We just call it something different. So even Holliwell says, well, today we just call it modern psychology. The law reads that certain ideas must be dissolved and cleared from the mind in order that other ideas or new ideas of a different character may replace them. It may be explained as a bottle that is already full, which must be emptied before it can be refilled or added to. Jesus spoke of it when he said, "Neither do men put new wine in old bottles, else the bottles break." For example, if you hold in your mind that someone has wronged you or has treated you unjustly, you cannot be free from your wrongdoings or injustice so long as you hold that thought in your consciousness. So I've said this, and I'm so glad Halliwell kind of brought this up. He explains it different, of course, but I brought this up in other chapters. Is And even with manifesting and why things aren't really working and why it's really, when it really comes down to really the main reason why you should forgive. Okay, forgive any situation, forgive somebody, especially with another person. Because he says it right here. For example, if you hold in your mind that someone has wronged you or has treated you unjustly, they mistreated you, they wronged you, they steal from you, they lie about you, whatever they're doing, you cannot be, listen to what he says. This is very strong. You cannot be free from his wrongdoings or injustice so long as you hold the thought in your consciousness. So when you hold that thought in your consciousness, you unforgive, you don't forgive the person. What happens is you're bound to that person. Even Neville Galder taught this. That's why forgiveness, if you truly forgive, is true forgetfulness. The power behind it is it binds you to that person. It binds you to that unforgiveness of that person. Okay, which is a lower consciousness. You're bound to it. The only way to break that bond, to break that connection to them, is truly, truly, truly forgive. This is what's going on. This is why unforgiveness is so powerful. You can't forgive somebody. You're bound to them. Often people complain that they do not understand clearly or get the illumination of the Spirit as others have testified. You need only to search your memory to find the cause. If you do not get the understanding you expect, first search your mind for lurking, unforgiving thoughts that have tucked away from your notice. So this is kind of what I mean when I talk about awareness. Okay, the kind of first step, I teach a lot about Neville Goddard, but really the first step in all this is self-awareness. Being self-aware in your 3D world. The more aware you are, the more aware you are of your negative thinking, your deep-rooted beliefs, your deep-rooted thoughts, the more aware you are, at that point, you can start fixing them. So he's really talking about awareness here. If you do not get the understanding you expect, first search your mind. So first be aware. First search your mind. You start being aware for lurking, unforgiving thoughts that have been tucked away from your notice. Okay. And a lot of us, sometimes when I think back, and sometimes even every once in a while, I'll have an unforgiving thought pop in my mind. Or what pops in my mind is an unforgiving situation. Maybe something happened to me. Maybe somebody did something to me, and I haven't thought about it for a long time. All of a sudden, it pops in my mind. When it pops in my mind, all that tells me is I have a sense of unforgiveness there. Because if I really truly forgive, I would forget about it and completely forget about it. Pull that weed and root and all. Okay, it would just totally leave my mind. I would never think about it again. But the reason why it's basically popping up in my mind once in a while is because there's a sense of unforgiveness there within myself. Is your thought realm filled with resentment that you may hold against some person or condition? Have you a feeling that you have been slighted by this person or that one? The law reads, if ye forgive not their trespasses, neither will your Father forgive your trespasses. So this is what he says right here. Okay, if you can't forgive, the law reads, okay, now you're living in disharmony with the law. So when we talk about law of forgiveness, what's the opposite of forgiveness? Well, you're not forgiving. Okay, then that leads to That leads to resentment, that leads to guilt, that leads to just negative chatter. You're dwelling on it. So this is the law reads, if ye forgive not your trespasses, neither will your Father forgive your trespasses. So if you can't forgive something else, you can't forgive a circumstance, well, neither can you be forgiven. We make the conditions for ourselves as we meet the demands of the law. Some people ask if we believe in canceling monetary obligations of those who owe us. Okay, the people owe you money, people borrow money from you, they don't pay you back. Or literally should we cancel the debts of our debtors? There were a number of people in the past months who have made the front page in a newspaper because they wrote off their books with receipts in full to all who owed them. Did this eliminate the debts? Well, the debtors were loud in their praises for such a generous soul. But they came right back to do more business with the grocer or the butcher and asked them to charge it. In other words, they were glad to be relieved of the debt charged against them, but they knew no different than to return and open a new account. The answer is that so long as we believe in the necessity and the reality of debt, such debt will continue to endure. So long as we believe in debts, we shall get into debt and continue to collect all the burdens and headaches that come with it. He who does not in his own thought release all men who owe him stands liable himself to fall into debt. Listen to this. He who does not in his own thoughts release all men who owe him stands liable himself to fall into debt. If we send receipted bills to all who owe us, would that relieve us from the burden of debt? That's a question. No, the signing of the receipts does not erase the idea of the debt from our minds. So here he's digging deep. So basically he's using debt in a way of business, like, kind of like in your 3D world. And what he's saying is, okay, just because someone owes you a debt and you write a receipt and they never paid you back, but you write a receipt to them saying that they paid and they gave it to you and you gave it to them. Okay, that's kind of like what I'm doing in my outside world. Okay, but what he's saying is that that's not good enough to release someone's debt, because even though we're doing that action, what's really going on, or what can really happen, is that same way for forgiveness. If you have a best friend that wronged you, you might say physically that, oh, I forgive you. You might even have a long conversation with, oh, I forgive you. But secretly in your mind, in your conscious mind, you don't forgive them. You keep on replaying it. Okay, you have negative chatter about it. So that's what he's saying. So I'll reread the whole thing again, not the whole paragraph. But he said, if we send receipted bills to all who owe us, would that relieve us from the burden of debt? Then he says, no, it wouldn't. By signing the receipts does not erase the idea of debt from our minds. So that's why I just explained. It doesn't. We have to erase everything from our mind. Okay, we have to truly forgive and forget. First, we must erase from our minds the thought that anyone can owe us anything. This then will bring us into a clear atmosphere in which we sow seeds or ideas of abundance for those who are indebted to us. In this way, the debtors will find their minds more fertile soil to bring forth thoughts of abundance. When they catch the spirit of the free-flowing thought of plenty, they will be happy to pay their debts, and all that is justly ours will come to us cheerfully. In other words, bring this up. I'm right here. In other words, when we free our minds from all thoughts of debt, try to realize more and more presence of plenty, we shall soon be strong enough to reach out and realize abundance for our debtors. As they are lifted up from the thoughts of limitation and lack, they will attract more and more substance with which they can pay their bills. In this way, and only this way, can debts be permanently canceled. Through applying the law of forgiveness, both parties concerned will be lifted from the debt of consciousness to a prosperous consciousness, and prosperity and plenty shall abound. Everyone must at time, everyone must at some time walk the faith, walk the path. I don't know if I'm tired or what. I've been doing these every day. Um, Everyone must at some time walk the path of forgiveness. We must learn to live this law. Listen to this. I love this. We're getting close to wrapping this up. Everyone must at some time walk the path of forgiveness. We must learn to live this law. We must learn to forgive. I mean, this is like the number one thing here. It must be important, for the master taught that there was no hope of forgiveness for the unforgiving. Only as we forgive are we forgiven. We must put forth the first effort. Our willingness must open the way for our forgiveness. We dare not ask more of the law than we are able to extend to ourselves or to our brothers. And I love this. Like, for one, we can't twist the law. Remember, with all the laws of the universe here, we can't twist the law to work for us. The law is the law. Remember, the laws of the universe don't discriminate. It's just as is. Okay, either you work in harmony with it or you don't. But the law is the law. It doesn't discriminate. We can't twist the law to work for us. So that's what he's saying. We dare not ask more of the law than we are able to extend to ourselves or to our brothers or to other people. Okay, this is like you reap what you sow. Or giving and receiving. You're not going to get more when you give nothing. You know what I mean? That's what he's saying. Unless we prove this law by living it, we cannot hope to gain the bigness of character that life requires. As we ponder over this whole thought, we may wonder if the Master was looking forward to the essential part forgiveness must play in order of the world events of today. The truth runs deep into everyday life. When we recall the rivalries that prevail in almost every shop and office, when we see the jealousies that divide the neighborhood, when we observe and feel the envies, both scholastic and professional, when we have strife and discord in our own homes, we see the Solomon, through simple teachings of forgiveness, strike deeply into your life and mine. We cannot forgive. We may know we have a small soul untouched by the teachings of the Master. These are our daily tests, for it is the school of forgiveness that lessons of life are learned. And here we have a poem called Forgive. That slight misdeed of yesterday, why should it mar today? The thing he said, the thing you did, have long since passed away. For yesterday was but a trial, today you will succeed, and from mistakes of yesterday you will come some noble deed. Forgive yourself for thoughtlessness. Do not condemn the past, for it is gone with its mistakes. Their memory cannot last. Forget the failures and misdeeds. From such experience rise. Why should you let your head be bowed? Lift your heart and eyes. And this was selected down here, meaning that, we don't really know the author of this. But anyway, to kind of wrap this up of forgiveness, I mean, this is probably one of the, every law of the universe has its own little hardness to it a little bit. We never said, kind of living in harmony with the law is easy. This is where when we get into manifesting, this is a concept where manifesting is hard. The concept of manifesting, the conceptual part of it is easy. Okay, well, if we follow Neville Goddard, then the core of Neville Goddard teaching, well, is relatively easy. You set an intention, you set desire. Okay, you go inside your imagination. Inside your imagination, you're in first person. You're living the life that you want to live. Okay, you have what you want. You have your intention inside your imagination, and you drift off to sleep. Okay, then as you drift off to sleep and you wake up, you live in the end and you dwell in the end. This is the whole teaching of Neville Goddard. So when we talk about it, it seems simple, but what holds us back, what makes it hard, is all of these bad habits that we have, that we're living against the law. We're not living in harmony with the law, which basically basically keeps all these manifesting techniques from really working and coming in our lives. Then what we do is we turn around, we blame the technique, we blame the person and say, well, this technique don't work. This person's, this person didn't help me. And we blame the outside, but it's really within us. Okay. If we want all these manifesting techniques to work, we have to go within, and we have to start becoming aware of our bad habits in our 3D world. Okay, our bad thinking habits. Now, what are we constantly thinking about? And we have to become aware of that. We have to start living in harmony with the law. And when we talk about forgiveness, the law of forgiveness here, to wrap this up, this is one of the tough ones, and this is the one, like, you kind of ask yourself, like, you sit there and say, oh yeah, I forgive this situation, oh yeah, I forgive this person, but do you truly forgive? Because deep rooted, you only know if you truly forgive, and when you're aware of it, you're 100% aware of it. You're 100% know if you truly forgive the person. But true forgiveness is forgetfulness. And I love when Neville Goddard said this in Pruning Shears of Revision, in one of his lectures, is that true forgiveness or forgetfulness is when you truly forgive somebody, you forget about it. It happened in the past, you never bring it up again. You never bring it up again to the other person, but more importantly, you don't bring it up in your conscious mind. You never think about it. It never pops in once in a while, and you bring emotion to it, and you replay it in your mind, and you think, oh, I'm going to get back at him. That's not true forgiveness. Okay? If you truly forgive somebody, you truly forgive a situation, you totally forget about it. Out of sight, out of mind. It never pops in your mind, never, ever again, because you truly forgave. And this is something, even when I read this chapter again, I read it a couple times because I did this video, but it speaks worlds kind of to me. It really speaks loud to me, because this is something that I do. It's just something, a question to myself, like, do I truly forgive? In some situations, yes, in other situations, no. And it harbors inside you. It harbors that hate inside you. And with manifesting, when you harbor that hate and you dwell on those thoughts, you dwell on the negative, well, what does that mean? Okay, that's what we're learning here. Okay, when you dwell on that negative state, well, all that means is more of those negative things are going to come to you. More of those similar things are going to come to you. So this is a law of karma. Okay, is how do we break this law of karma? Okay, now breaking the law of karma in this chapter is living in harmony with the law, living in harmony with all laws of the universe. Okay, living in harmony is forgive. The opposite of forgiveness is you don't forgive. You dwell on the negative. Okay, and that builds up resentment, hate, ridicule, and it harbors inside you. Okay, then at the time, you're connected to the person. That's what you have to understand. You're connected to that sin. You're connected to that negativity that other person did to you. You're bound. You're both bound to it. That's why Jesus preached so much on forgiveness, because he knew you were bound to it. Okay, the only way to break that bondage is to truly forgive and forget. True forgiveness to break that bondage. Then when you break that bondage, it's no more in your mind. You don't give it even one little ounce of thought. Now at that point, you can go on and think about prosperity. You can go on and think about happiness, joyful thoughts, and living a happy, joyful life. But other than that, my friends, I know this took a while. Blessings to you. Love you guys. If you have any questions, if you made it this far, if you have any questions, comment below, and I'll see you in chapter 10.